on the wind. Watch how I soar.
The hell? It's okay. I'm a leaf on the wind. What does that mean?
In this video, I'm going to tell you everything I know about destroyer design. Destroyers in Stellaris can fulfill a number of roles in the early, mid, and late game. We need to make sure though that we have the correct designs to fulfill those roles. I'll be showing you those designs and also explaining why they work, what is effective about them, and why they're as good as I seem to think they are. If you enjoy this video, please track that like button. This first design showcases the answer to a question, and that question is, are destroyers better than corvettes? Can they beat them? And with this design, I am going to answer yes for you. So what do we have? We have a gunship bow and an interceptor ship stern. We've tried to maximize our small slots, and to do that we've now got 4 small slots and 1 medium slot. Why have we done that? Well, the evasion of corvettes is the highest amongst any ship class in the game. In order to counter that, we need to have very high tracking. These autocannons have very high tracking. That is true for all small weapon slots. Now, you do want to get probably a balance here between kinetic and energy weapons. I have gone for autocannons because they have very high tracking at 75%, as well as good damage output with some good bonuses to hull and shields. Now, for the other 2 weapons I've got here, I've got a small and medium laser. I've gone for the laser over something like a plasma cannon because lasers have higher accuracy and higher tracking at the same level, and that is going to really help us to defeat these corvettes. With defenses, of course, I've gone for a mix between shields and crystal plating where available. If I swapped over to armor at this point, my costs of alloys would go from 278 up to 312. That's not a massive change, that's not something to get too worried about, but the crystal hull plating will be better if you can get it from an economic perspective. Of course, you're going to want to go with a Picket combat computer to increase that tracking. This plus 20 actually is going to mean that the tracking of our autocannons will negate any, and I really do mean any, corvette design you can come up against. You're going to be at 95% tracking, which is more than you need. Overall, this design is going to do fantastically well against any corvette design that it comes up against. I have tested that. If you want to check it out, there is a link to that video down below in the description. Now, what happens if we come up against other destroyers? Well, this is a design which should be very good against destroyers. What should we note about destroyers? Well, destroyers have relatively high evasion compared to other ships. They get a base of plus 35, so evasion is a factor for our destroyers. Something else to note is that destroyers have quite a high disengage chance. They've actually got a 1.5 times modifier on their disengagement. So we want to be hitting, whenever we hit them, with shots of a high damage output. So we don't want to have lots and lots of shots of a small level of damage. For instance, that would be your autocannons. We want to have weapons that fire with a high individual burst damage shots. So for that, we're going to be equipping a plasma thrower and also a railgun. Of course, as ever, you do want to have a balance between kinetic and energy, just in case you come up against an armor design. But in the artillery bow slot, in your large slot, the plasma thrower is going to be better. You're going to get a plus 50% bonus to hull damage, and at this point, hull is going to be one of the biggest things you're going to come up against when you're facing enemy ships. Armor and shields, not until the very, very late game are they going to be an issue, when you're getting lots and lots of repeatables that are boosting armor and shields. But at that point, you're probably going to be facing with a different weapon anyway. Now, important to note here, I've still gone with the Picket class combat computer because our large slot weapon has very low tracking, only 5%. So if we get a plus 20 bonus from our Picket computer as well as our sensors, we should hopefully be able to negate the evasion of other destroyers we come up against. And of course, I have gone with an auxiliary fire control +5 chance to hit. That accuracy bonus is going to be helpful for our weapons. If you come up against any other class of ship, that is cruisers or battleships, evasion isn't really going to be so much of an issue. And for that reason, I'd recommend you swap out and go with an artillery combat computer. In the mid-game, the line combat computer can still be useful, getting a +10 chance to hit. That can still boost some of your weapons here, for instance, but remember you can never go above 100% accuracy, and chance to hit does add to accuracy, so don't overload that bonus. Having said that, I would definitely recommend the artillery combat computer. That extra weapons range is going to mean your alpha strike comes in before your opponent strikes, meaning that they will be responding to you with fewer ships after that initial burst of fire. I personally would say that an artillery combat computer is better before we look at getting screening tactics and that sort of thing on the table. What happens when we get to the late game though? Well, once we get neutron launchers, you're definitely going to want to put those on your ships. Neutron launchers are the most powerful weapon that is at your disposal. That plus 75% hull damage is so tasty. They have massive damage output, as you can see here, 468 to 1000 damage per shot. Yes, they've got a long cooldown, but their alpha strike is going to be phenomenal. Now, they have a 90% accuracy, so your line combat computers, they're really not going to help. I would recommend you go with artillery combat computers for extra weapons range. Of course, in your medium slot, you should balance out the kinetic option here for anti-shield damage, so I'd go with something like a medium Gauss cannon. What about a balanced design? Something that is good against destroyers, all right against larger ships, and reasonably okay against corvettes.
Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
Now, this is a design that I've seen a lot of players run, and to some extent, I think there's definitely merit in it. What have we got here? Well, we've got a large plasma thrower on our large slot, and then we've got two autocannons. The autocannons are going to have good accuracy and tracking. They're going to help us against corvettes, and this large plasma cannon is going to be doing most of the damage against all other ship types we come up against, though that low tracking is going to really hinder it when you're fighting corvettes. This ship design is not something I'd necessarily recommend. If you're wanting to have a balanced fleet, I'd probably recommend you have some anti-corvette and anti-destroyer or anti-everything else ships in together, rather than splitting up your design in this way. You kind of end up with the worst of both worlds, depending on what you come up against. That would be my opinion here. Now, there's something I've not included here, which is picket slots. You could have picket slots on your ship. Destroyers have an abundance of them, but ship designs with picket slots, for instance this one which has 3 picket slots and 2 small weapons, and this one which has 2 picket slots and 1 large weapon, they're really not worth it. It is better always to destroy the enemy ship, to be dealing a higher rate of damage, than it is to be attempting to negate any of their incoming weapons, be that fighters, be that missiles. You are always going to have a better time without using the picket slots. The same isn't true with fighters. Fighters can be very useful to negate enemy fighters or missiles, but with these picket slots they simply don't cut the mustard. They're not effective enough to destroy or disrupt enough of the incoming damage from an enemy ship, which generally speaking won't be focused on a single weapon. All ship designs tend to have a mixture of weapons. Carriers will not just have fighters, missile corvettes will not just have missiles, and that focus on the weapons that are incoming, yes, you're going to stop some of them, and if you really focus heavily on this, you'll stop a lot of that incoming damage, but what you'll be doing in response will not be at an acceptable enough level or a high enough level to really save the day for you. I really would not recommend building a design like this. But what about building an effective corvette design? If you want to know about that, click the video on screen now.